is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. Now, the Stuph File presents Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy. It's radio that's out of this world.
Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy, is a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada and the author of National Geographic's Backyard Guide to the Night Sky, and also National Geographic's Stargazer's Atlas, the ultimate guide to the night sky. And Andrew, here's a topic that we've touched on before, space debris. And apparently it's in the news again.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's really becoming ever more critical, is this whole idea of pollution in space, that, humans putting out more and more stuff into space, assets there, and like not just satellites themselves, but the boosters, the rocket systems that come with it, and then, retired satellites floating around. So there's a lot out there, and scientists are basically sounding the alarm now that we really need to address this problem now, not just in low Earth orbit, but the Earth's orbit itself. There seems to be more and more debris left behind in the same orbit that Earth has around the sun. So that Earth's orbit seems to be more and more cluttered with things so some of these boosters and other bits and pieces of things that are left behind, parts of spacecrafts and giant bus-sized spacecrafts themselves, just floating around in the same orbit as the Earth. And this is something that needs to be addressed, they feel, soon, because there's on the horizon many more, like orders of magnitude more satellites that will be put into place in and around Earth and the lunar orbit. We're planning on exploring the moon, so there's more assets that will be in and around the moon as well. So this needs to be taken care of. And what they're suggesting is that we use the same paradigm as looking at how we look at the seas, the oceans as well, and how we mitigate the pollution of the oceans as well, and looking at that as a model, perhaps the protection of how we protect our oceans and protecting this other natural resource, which is space.
Now, I think there's an even greater danger, because while pollution in the seas is a very, very important issue, and Lord knows just with major world wars, there's a lot of stuff down there from battle alone, never mind all the other junk that we're putting down there. While it may be causing eco damage, which, well, not may, it definitely is causing some sort of eco damage, it's not posting a danger to anybody who's on the sea, as opposed to in space. Those things are just flying around waiting to hit something. Exactly.
Yeah, and the more of these things that are in space, the more chances there are of collisions. I mean, one of these scenarios, nightmare scenarios, if you may remember, played out in that movie with Sandra Bullock called Gravity, where you had this chain reaction of satellites hitting each other, causing huge clouds of metallic shrapnel that just polluted entire orbits, and any other satellite that was in the same orbit would be smashed to smithereens, basically exploding into its own shrapnel cloud. So you have this chain reaction potential. And, that's what played out in this Hollywood movie. But it's the same kind of really, these dangers can in reality play out. And basically the idea is to prevent these kind of potential tragedies in space, which many scientists and folks in the space community at large are thinking this is a commons place. This is for all of humanity, to benefit all of humanity. So there are these rogue actors, nations like China and Russia that are kind of using space with impunity without really even consideration to other nations and the safety. So there's this collective call that scientists are putting out there. There should be put out to develop some kind of legally binding agreements that nations across the world would be held accountable to.
Now, this story has come out in the news because there was a recent letter that was written. Who was the letter written by, and who was it written for?
Yeah, I mean, these are this was basically put out by scientists themselves and engineers. It's a collective of people, stakeholders, basically, who work in this field, who are realizing that there's this wild west out there. And it's really for nations' leaders, it's for policymakers, particularly governments, that really need to take charge of making sure of protecting this environment. Just as we protect the seas and other natural environments on Earth, we need to do the same for space. And as you had mentioned, Peter, I mean, it's even more, I think timely, because everyone is just going into space unlike ever before. It's kind of like the price of democratizing the access of space. There needs to, it behooves nations to really then be a curator of, a protector of this precious resource.
Let's be honest, we have a hard time getting people generally to speak about things like climate change, protecting the environment, on this very planet. It seems to be a situation that a lot of times falls on deaf ears. So how can we expect to go beyond and try to protect the environment around our planet beyond the surface when we can't necessarily take care of the surface?
That's exactly the challenge. I mean, how can we do that? If we have issues on our own planet, how are we going to do that and elsewhere? And, I'm hoping that it's not some tragedy that would befall a mission that, obviously a human-rated mission, not a robotic, not, unmanned satellites, but it may take that for actions to happen, some kind of tragedy. I mean, you look at the oceans and things, what brings attention to the general public to take a stance? It's usually like an oil rig disaster, right? Or a tanker collides or breaks open and, millions of barrels of oil pollute, the Gulf of Mexico. We've seen these kind of things play out time and again, and it's usually in the aftermath and the cleanup of that is when things happen. Unfortunately, in space, we're still learning and getting our space legs, so to speak, and understanding what the ramifications are of these kind of potential tragedies. I don't even know if we can deal. How are we going to deal with it? Once you have that kind of shrapnel clouds, for instance, happening, polluting orbits, we may be limiting our access to space if we don't act.
Well, speaking of limiting our access to space, isn't the Hubble telescope being affected by the very debris that we are now talking about?
Absolutely. This is something, really, it's incredible. I mean, the stories just keep on coming from what our humans' effects in space. And, when we talked about the Hubble Space Telescope, that's been coined as the discovery machine for astronomy. I mean, it goes back for 3 decades now, and it's practically rewritten our textbook of our knowledge of astronomy and the universe at large. And now it seems that the group of astronomers have ringing the alarm bell that even the Hubble can't escape the satellite problem. And when I'm talking about the satellite problem, it's like Starlink and other internet satellite constellations that are being put up. Like SpaceX has put up, over 2,000 satellites, working satellites in low Earth orbit to kind of give internet access globally to remote regions, high-speed internet. But there's plans for having, eventually right now we're looking at over 100,000 of these internet satellites being put up by multiple telecommunication companies around the world. Major players in China, in Europe, and North America, we're talking about mostly, of putting up these assets. And with this growing number of artificial satellites that are currently planned, it turns out that astronomers have found that a fraction of the Hubble Space Telescope's images have been crossed by satellites. And this number of satellites photobombing Hubble images has increased over the last decade, obviously, because there's more satellites. Also, Hubble telescope has slowly decaying in its orbit. So it's decayed about 50 kilometers in the last decade or so, meaning it's lower, closer. It's a natural event of the satellite. And of course, that means more satellites above it are creeping into the picture. And in the next decade, they are calling that this will need close study and monitoring. So there's definitely this impact of satellite trails on Hubble observations. And this is really alarming scientists because they're going, it's not just the Hubble, it's all these ground-based observatories, multi-billion-dollar facilities that astronomers use may be seriously affected in the coming decade by these huge constellation of satellites.
The satellites up there are starting to sound a little bit like watching LA traffic.
Yeah, I mean, and the question, again becomes, once you park these satellites, there's a limited amount of parking space up there around the Earth. Once you've got 100,000 satellites in the next decade up there, where is there going to be a safe space left for not just Hubble but any other satellite?
100,000 satellites. I'm just trying to figure out. Man is expecting to explore other realms, be it the moon or beyond. How do you even get through the ring of satellites in a launch?
Exactly. I mean, already, there is about 4,000 operational satellites right now in space, and guess what? Half of those are made up by Starlink satellites from SpaceX.
Wow. The guy who owns Twitter. Anyway.
Studies that are now.
Yeah. We are just about out of time once again, which means we don't get a chance to talk about some of the other issues we wanted to talk about, like Chinese spacecraft inspecting U.S. satellites. Also with China, the fact that their rover on Mars seems to be dead, and time zones on the moon. Those are things we never got a chance to discuss. You want to go over to Patreon and talk about those things?
You bet. Let's do it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew.
You bet. Clear skies.
Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy, and the author of National Geographic's Backyard Guide to the Night Sky, and also the new National Geographic Stargazer's Atlas, the ultimate guide to the night sky. You can check out his website at thenightskyguy.com. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0708, and you can find links to Andrew's site to get your own personal autographed copy. And Patreon subscribers, you can hear more of Andrew as a Patreon reward extra, where we'll discuss China's spy satellites spying on other satellites, China's dead rover on Mars, and what time is it on the moon, and more. Just go to our Patreon page, and if you're not already a member, become one of the select patrons of the show. Visit patreon.com/The Stuph File Program.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuph is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.